Welcome to the program, Jake Broe.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
I would like to start with the latest developments from Ukraine. The Ukrainian army has successfully destroyed Russia's Black Sea Fleet submarine, Rostov-on-Don, which was in the Crimean dock. From your perspective, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's fascinating because this same submarine was originally struck back in September of last year. Ukraine hit it with some Storm Shadow cruise missiles. And there were photos leaked of the submarine and the damage. I just assumed that the submarine was a total loss. But I'm convinced now that the Russians were trying to fix the hull to make it watertight so they could potentially tow the submarine back to a Russian port, maybe Novorossiysk. I'm just speculating here, but I think Ukraine had the intelligence that this sub was close to being movable in the water, and so they struck it again. This was a $300 million Kilo-class submarine. Russia really wanted to salvage something from it, but Ukraine had the intel on the ground, and they successfully sank it. Now it's at the bottom of the port of Sevastopol.
I would like also to cover the situation in the Black Sea. From your perspective, for how long Russia is ready to sustain such unsustainable losses regarding their fleet in the Black Sea region, in the Black Sea?
This is an aspect of the war that I think the international community doesn't talk enough about. But as far as the battle for the Black Sea, Ukraine has won. Russia has completely retreated. All of their ships have left the port city of Sevastopol. They're either in the Sea of Azov or the port city of Novorossiysk. Ukraine had the Black Sea mined along their coastline, and it's now being removed. The mines are being removed with the help of Bulgaria and Romania. And on the other side of the Black Sea, Russia is now mining their ports because they're so terrified of Ukrainian drone boats. So the battle for the Black Sea, in my opinion, is over. Ukraine has won. This is part of the reason why I think Russia is looking for a freeze in the conflict or a ceasefire. They can't sustain these losses of their naval assets for much longer. And I do believe that this is part of Putin's calculus for wanting a ceasefire in this war.
I'd like also to cover with you a ceasefire issue. What is your take on that? And do you believe that can Russia be trusted during the negotiations?
Absolutely, Russia cannot be trusted. There is not an agreement that Putin has signed that he has not violated or broken whenever he thought it was advantageous. Putin's word means nothing. So I think Putin and his advisors are very concerned about the Russian economy. The wealth fund of Russia, Putin had saved up $600 billion since 2012, specifically to survive sanctions. The wealth fund of Russia, the money that Putin saved up, was not meant to fight this war. It was meant to get through the next 20 years of potential sanctions for invading Ukraine. So this was supposed to be a 3-day special military operation. We're now on 2.5 years of war. Putin has been spending this money to keep the economy going, keep the war effort going, but the money's going to run out. We don't know what real inflation is in Russia, but it's a strong number, double digits. And I think Putin is looking at the calendar and he's looking at the upcoming winter. And we can think back to the last winter in Russia, all the utility failures, people not having heat or electricity for the failure of their own energy infrastructure. And he doesn't want to go into another winter with potentially half of Russia's oil refining capacity offline. If they don't have gasoline, if they don't have diesel, if they don't have kerosene, things in Russia are going to get very bad this winter. That's why Putin is working with Viktor Orban of Hungary, talking about peace talks, talking with the people of Belarus and the people of China, making it look like it's some kind of big international effort or push for a ceasefire, when it's what he wants. Another clear indication is this prisoner exchange. Putin was willing to let go of these American citizens and these Russian dissidents to get back some of his own personnel that had been locked up in the West. But I think this was a gesture from Putin and the Russians sending a signal to the West that they want to talk. They're looking for a way to freeze the conflict. I don't think that's the end of the war. I think they just want a 2 or 4 year gap, and then they'll come back for more of Ukraine.
But what does the West want in this issue? Do you feel that there could be any kind of pressure on Ukraine to negotiate with Russia before or after the US general election?
The problem with saying the West really isn't unified. You know, when you talk to people in Scandinavia or the Baltics, you know, they're the West. What do they want? Versus Germany, France, what do they want? Versus the United States, what do they want? So, I mean, if we just want to list what's the most important, I think from the US perspective, the number one thing they want is for Russia's nuclear weapons to remain contained inside of Russia and never used. That's priority number one. So what kind of settlements would be acceptable to the United States? They just don't want the dissolution and the breakup of Russia because the number one priority is preventing loose nukes. But what does perhaps former Soviet republics, former people who used to live under Kremlin rule, and they want Russia completely expelled from all of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. This is the position I support. I don't think Russia should be rewarded for their aggression. They shouldn't be allowed to keep any territory, any land. So I personally want Russia to go back to their own country and stay there. They're not allowed to keep anything. We'll start talking about lifting sanctions and easing sanctions once every Russian soldier is out from any occupied territories. That's what I think the bottom line should be, but ultimately this is up to Ukraine. I don't think anyone can tell Ukraine what to do, and if Ukraine enters good faith negotiations with either Putin's government or any government that might replace Putin's government, it's up to the Ukrainian people, it's up to the Ukrainian government what a potential settlement might look like.
Is there a chance for a major policy change in Washington after the US general election regarding Ukraine and regarding the Ukraine strategy?
Absolutely. So things are going to change on January 20th. Joe Biden is not running for re-election. He will be leaving office on January 20th, whether it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who wins in November. When they take office, they're going to bring in new people. It's going to be a different national security team. Jake Sullivan, I promise, is going away, and we will get someone different. So with only less than 6 months left on the clock for this administration, I don't think Biden is going to change any policies. I just don't think there's any incentive with so little time left. But once we get a new administration and new people making these decisions, I guarantee you there will be policy changes from the United States towards this war come January.
For better or for worst, from your perspective?
It depends. It depends on what you think could happen. If, for example, the restriction on ATACMS being used on Russian airfields potentially up to 300 kilometers inside of Russia, I personally don't think Russia is going to respond with nuclear weapons, but some policy experts do. And for 2.5 years, that's been the nightmare scenario we've been trying to avoid. I say lift all restrictions, let Ukraine fight back. That's my position, but maybe I have a higher risk tolerance than other people do. So I understand people's concerns. I just don't think with all of these red lines, Putin on day 2 of this war raised the equivalent of Russia's DEFCON, saying, don't help Ukraine in any way. If you do, I will use nuclear weapons. He said, this is not a threat. But the delivery of HIMARS, the delivery of ATACMS, Patriot systems, Leopard tanks, F-16s now, Russia's not going to use nuclear weapons. There's no benefit to doing so.
You have mentioned and you have said about all those weaponry which has been provided to Ukraine. why is there still this fear of escalation in the United States if Ukraine has already received lots of types of US-made weapons, which could provoke escalation, as some people have thought in the United States?
It's just the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of, let's say Putin's government does fall. Does the person who replaces Putin, is this a more rational actor or less rational? I think Prigozhin's thunder run to Moscow last summer concerned a lot of people. What if more Russian generals had sided with Prigozhin? What if there had been a successful coup? And what if it was Prigozhin and Dmitry Ukin who was in charge of Russia's 6,000 nuclear weapons? Would they be as hesitant to use nuclear weapons as Putin has? So once again, it all comes down to preventing Russia's 6,000 nuclear warheads from being used or falling into the hands of someone who would use them. In retrospect, it's been proven all false. 2.5 years, the delivery of all these systems, all these red lines have been crossed. Russia was never going to use a nuclear weapon in this war. Never.
But don't you think the United States can manage these risks even if Russia collapses or even if there is a regime change?
I don't think so. If I'm just being completely honest, as an American, I think the political situation in our own country, we are so polarized, we are so divided, we have so many people, so many citizens who are tragically, I think, have fallen victim to Russian propaganda and disinformation. This isn't helping coming from Donald Trump, who routinely repeats Kremlin propaganda, who stokes these fears of a nightmare nuclear scenario. If you say the United States has a very powerful military, if we had a unified political will to contain Russia or help Russia secure their nukes in the event their government becomes less stable, we have the capacity, we just don't have the political will. And I don't think we will anytime soon. Our country is so divided. So for people in Europe, I wish we were the country of the Cold War, 30, 40 years ago when our two parties were united on foreign policy, but we're not. If anyone tries to do any good in this world on either side, the other side is just going to oppose them because America is so fractured at the moment.
Let's cover also US internal politics and also US general election. What is your choice on the US general election, if it is not a secret?
Well, I support Kamala Harris because I think Kamala Harris has a better position to support Ukraine. Bottom line, in my opinion, Donald Trump is too old to be president. He'll be 78 at the time of the election. That's all I have to say, in my opinion. 2 months ago, people were screaming both Joe Biden and Donald Trump were too old to be the candidates. Joe Biden did the responsible thing, and he dropped out of the race to allow his younger vice president to accept the nomination. Donald Trump, I mean, if we want to be generous, we could just call him a wild card, and we don't know what he'll do. But if I have to pick between uncertainty, I don't know what he's going to do, and certainty that the level of funding and support from the United States will continue as it is today, I'm going to take that option. I'm going to take Kamala Harris. She's a continuation of strong support for Ukraine versus incoherence, in my opinion, from Donald Trump and his policy team.
I would like also to ask you about the public opinion in the United States. What do Americans think about the current situation in Ukraine? And do you feel that there is enough support among Americans to continue support for Ukraine this and next year and to help us until our victory?
So the good news is that public opinion on Russia and Ukraine in the United States isn't changing. When you poll Americans, do you support military aid to Ukraine? It's consistently above 60%. So it's a near supermajority of Americans who understand Russia's the aggressor. Russia's the bad guy. Ukraine is defending itself. We should support Ukraine. But I do think the concern is that when you ask Americans, what are your top 5 issues when going to the polls to vote? I don't think the war in Ukraine is in the top 5 anymore. Given that we're so consumed with domestic politics, Americans just care about other issues, and they're going to vote for either Harris or Trump based on those issues. Unfortunately, not Ukraine. There are Americans like me where this is one of their top priorities, their top issues, but I just think we're frozen in this election cycle for another 95 days, and there are other issues that people are talking about and paying attention to more. Now, you asked, will support continue? I think if Kamala Harris wins and we can keep, it may be Republicans control the House or the Senate, but if it's a slim majority, I do think we can pass another military aid package this December or January for an additional $60 billion in aid through 2025. Congress won't change in 2026 either, so I think if Kamala Harris wins, and Russia wants to keep this war going, military aid from the United States will continue as is now for at least another 2 years.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and I also would like to cover the foreign policy, and I would like also to get back to the future possible Kamala Harris administration. There have been some reports that some people who worked during on Obama administration could also work in the Harris administration. Are there any kind of risks of some people who had not really strong policy, strong position on Russia? They could make and provide some bad advices to Kamala Harris.
I understand your concern, and I do believe that President Obama wasn't very strong on foreign policy. I don't think President Obama thought much about Ukraine when Russia invaded Crimea and took it in 2014. I know there are stronger European politicians, such as the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, who was telling Obama, don't send weapons. If the United States sends weapons to Ukraine, this is back in 2014, it'll make the situation worse. So I forget who the president of France at the time was, but the German Chancellor was advising Obama, let me talk to Putin, we're friends, don't send weapons, it'll only make the situation worse. That world is gone. All goodwill and sympathy from European leaders, aside from Viktor Orban, is gone. So any return potential in cabinet officials from the Obama years, no, I don't think their opinions will be the same because this large-scale invasion changed everything. We gave Putin everything he wanted. We appeased Putin at every opportunity to prevent this invasion, and Putin did it anyways, because he had already made up his mind he wanted to do it. Nothing could have prevented this war, in my opinion. Putin, when he came back to power in 2012, when he saw Maidan revolution and his preferred guy being expelled from Ukraine, he always knew he was going to do this. It didn't matter what the West did.
Let's cover also prisoner exchange, prisoner swap. You have already mentioned about this issue. What is your personal opinion on that? And there have been lots of reports and discussions on the pros and cons of this decision. And what is your personal opinion on this topic?
I am personally relieved and very happy to see U.S. journalists such as Evan Gershkovich come home. I'm a veteran, and I'm happy to see former United States Marine Paul Whelan also come home. So there's a cost. There is a cost to Americans going to Russia and then just being abducted by the government and being held because we had to give back to Russia assassins and spies. These are very bad people who committed crimes in our countries, and this is who Putin wanted back. In exchange, we just got our journalists back. So there's a cost. I'm relieved, I'm happy, but some very bad people were allowed to go back to Russia and rejoin their efforts to terrorize and spy on the West. I do think that the story that people in Ukraine are paying attention to is these released Russian dissidents. Vladimir, I forget his last name, but
Karamurza, yeah.
yes, he's a former protege of Boris Nemtsov, the Russian politician who Putin killed in 2015. These dissidents immediately upon landing in Berlin gave a press conference in which they said they wanted sanctions on Russia eased. They're fine with sanctions on oligarchs, take their yachts, take their villas, but sanctions that generally hurts the Russian economy, they're saying that it's too much. Ordinary Russians are being hurt. And the responsible thing for the West to do is to ease these sanctions. I was very offended by that. I thought that was absurd. I think these guys who just spent years in Russian prison and we got them released, wasn't a goodwill gesture from Putin. I want to believe that they don't actually believe what they're saying, and they're just trying to send a message to the Russian people. If Putin's government collapses, these guys want to be able to fly home and then say, it's those evil Western countries who had sanctions, who caused our economic collapse. I always opposed them, but now it's time to rebuild. Vote for me, and Russia can move forward with our Western partners to rebuild. So I understand why they're saying what they're saying, but they also don't want to talk about the war in Ukraine. They don't want to talk about ordinary Russians who are supporting this war in Ukraine. It's a genocide. It's just political posturing from these Russian dissidents. I hope that Putin's regime does collapse and these guys can return home and they can make a difference. They can improve the political situation and improve the lives of ordinary Russians, but that's potentially years away, and people are dying now in Ukraine. And I wish they would speak up and say that ordinary Russians supporting this war is wrong.
I would like also to cover one interesting moment of this prisoner swap, prisoners exchange. Former or not former FSB killer Vadim Krasikov was released in exchange to American citizens. Vadim Krasikov was personally met by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. He even hugged him in the airport. How do you see this? Is it kind of a message to Russia's special services or to the army? What is your take on that?
You're absolutely correct. You know, Putin wants to praise and embrace people willing to kill and die for him, because that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about their families. He doesn't care about their welfare. He doesn't care about ordinary Russians in his empire. He only cares about men who are willing to kill and die for him right now, because that's the only use he has for his people. He wants to win this war. He wants to rebuild the old Russian Empire. He wants glory for himself. So, you know, it's the same thing with the Russian commander in Bucha, who indiscriminately killed civilians. When that man returned to Russia, Putin put a medal on him. If you're willing to kill for Putin, terrorize people, you will be praised and rewarded. That is the message that Putin sends to his own people every single day. There is no atrocity too great where Putin will say, I don't even support that. Every level of violence, every civilian killed, every building destroyed, school, hospital, whatever. Putin enjoys it at this point. I mean, I think he's drunk on power and he's a dictator. He's a mass murderer. He's a very bad guy. And I don't think this is good for the Russian people or Russian society, but we're not at the point where Russia has to pay for any of these crimes. Judgment Day for Russia is coming. It's not going to be good, but we're just not there yet.
And my last question for you, for how long could Russia's regime stay alive, in your personal opinion?
when the money runs out. This $300 billion that Putin had saved up, he's been fighting this war the last 2.5 years. I think before the war, Russia's annual military budget was like 70 or 80 billion US dollars equivalent. They've increased it dramatically. They're running out of money faster now. But Gazprom's no longer profitable. Gazprom, their Russian energy giants, started losing money last year, and their deficits have only doubled in the last year, with all these oil depots and refineries catching on fire, with sanctions, with the lack of expertise. The industries that brought wealth to the Russian government to fight this war are all being depleted. They're all being drained. They're all being deteriorated. And I don't think anyone has a true picture. I don't even think Putin understands the full extent of how bad things are for the Russian economy. But if he doesn't win this war, he thinks he's dead anyways. So he has, in his opinion, nothing to lose. He's going to keep going until he bankrupts the country, until his own people inevitably turn on him when they can't even afford to buy groceries in the grocery store anymore. Inflation is strong double digits. It's only going to get worse. That's the message. With time, all of Russia's problems will get worse if they don't freeze the conflict or get a ceasefire. That's why Putin is gradually coming around to this position.
Thank you, Jake, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Glory to the heroes.